Welcome to History for Your Sleep. Tonight, we open a quiet door into a forgotten part of medieval life, the way people truly slept, a world quieter, deeper, and more mysterious than our own, a world made to be heard before sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, there is something you should know. There is a part of medieval life almost no one talks about, a quiet world hidden behind stone walls, wooden doors, and fading firelight, a world that comes alive only in the silence of the night. Tonight, we open that door gently and step into the way people truly slept. But there is one detail we rarely notice. Night in medieval Europe did not fall in a moment. It drifted in slowly, like a calm breath spreading across the land. Light faded gently from rooftops, fields, and distant hills, and the world seemed to pause as the air cooled by a small degree. People noticed darkness first, not with their eyes, but with the change in temperature brushing against their arms and faces. Evening touched the countryside carefully, as though trying not to disturb the quiet patterns of daily life. A shepherd walking home from the fields felt it settle on his shoulders. A woman finishing her tasks near the well sensed it in the breeze. Children playing near the path lowered their voices without knowing why. It was an instinct woven deeply into the rhythm of medieval life. Yet hidden beneath this silence lies something unexpected. The transition from day to night carried a depth of atmosphere that modern life rarely allows us to feel. The scent of earth grew cooler and sharper. The last birds flew across the dimming sky with slow, steady wings. In the far distance, farm animals shifted positions, their soft movements blending into the quiet. Cottages scattered across the countryside became small islands of light in the growing dusk. Inside them, fires were stirred with practiced hands. Embers brightened into steady warmth. The glow washed gently across wooden beams, clay walls, and woven baskets set aside for the night. Families returned indoors one by one. A father rinsed his hands in a wooden basin. A mother checked the herbs hanging from the rafters, making sure lavender and dried mint were ready to soothe the evening. Children removed shoes, dusted with soil, placing them neatly near the door. Inside, the cottage felt warmer than the outside air. The walls held the heat of the day, releasing it slowly, like a quiet memory fading into the background. The fire crackled softly, casting long, slow shadows across the floor. It was not bright. It did not overpower the room. It simply offered a steady, comforting glow that let the night enter gently instead of abruptly. Clay bowls still held traces of the evening meal. A pot near the hearth gave off a faint aroma of grain and herbs. The dog curled near the door, lifting its head only once before settling into sleep again. Children leaned toward the warmth, their faces illuminated in a dim amber tone. But what happens next is something we often forget. The medieval evening was not yet sleep. It was a long, unhurried preparation for rest, a soft descent into stillness. The mother smoothed the straw mattress, removing small, rough pieces that might bother the children later in the night. She folded wool blankets, heavy and warm, and checked that their edges were tucked in so no cold air could slip in later. The father stirred the embers again, then sat for a moment with hands resting on his knees, letting his breath slow into the calm rhythm of night. He did not rush. There was nowhere to go. nothing left to do but ease the world toward quiet. Outside, darkness deepened. The wind brushed softly against the shutters. A goat shifted in its stall. An owl glided across the sky with a movement so smooth it seemed part of the night itself. This was the moment when the land exhaled and the homes inhaled. But the night gently pushed one more truth forward. As full darkness settled across the countryside, the world took on a deeper stillness. The sky changed from soft blue to velvety black. Stars appeared slowly, with a kind of shyness, each one glowing faintly at first, before settling into its quiet place above the land. Inside the cottage, the fire dimmed into a pool of orange light. It flickered with slow, lazy movements, casting gentle waves of brightness that rose and fell along the walls and ceiling. Shadows grew longer, but never felt sharp. They blended softly into the corners, like resting pieces of the night itself. The mother finished her quiet tasks. She checked the herbs tied in small bundles, lavender for calming, chamomile for breath, and rosemary for protection. The scent of smoke clung to everything, yet the soft fragrance of the herbs rose through it, bringing comfort to the air. The children moved closer together, their bodies relaxing as warmth surrounded them. They whispered a few final thoughts, their voices drifting like faint threads in the quiet room. One child rubbed tired eyes, leaning gently into the wool blanket as the rhythm of the night settled deeper into their bones. The father lifted a clay cup, drank the last sip of cool water, and placed it beside the hearth. A faint sound came from outside, a soft rustle, likely a small animal moving through the grass. He listened for a moment, not with worry, but with the instinctive awareness that came from living close to the land. Inside, nothing hurried, nothing demanded attention. The night moved on its own slow path, and the family moved with it. Yet something inside this darkness reveals a deeper story. In medieval life, light defined everything. The day belonged to work, noise, and movement. The night belonged to warmth, breath, and the intimate rhythm of home. The cottage interior glowed softly. Wooden beams absorbed the dim orange light and returned it in warm, earthy tones. A small clay pitcher reflected the fire, its curved surface shimmering like a calm ember. Every object seemed to settle, as though the night asked them to rest for the hours ahead. The mother gently shook a wool blanket, releasing a faint scent of lanolin and smoke. She laid it over the children, smoothing it carefully with slow, practiced movements. The straw mattress rustled beneath them, its texture familiar, neither soft nor harsh, simply part of life. The father sat for a moment longer, leaning on his elbows, watching the embers shift. The fire's rhythm matched the rhythm of his breathing, slow, steady, peaceful. Beyond the walls, the countryside held its own forms of quiet. A distant dog barked once. Wind brushed past the shutter again. Branches moved in gentle arcs beneath a pale slice of moonlight. No sound felt sharp. No movement felt alarming. Everything belonged. Inside the cottage, the world became smaller and more comforting. Children drifted nearer to sleep. The mother exhaled softly, her breath relaxing into the warmth of the room. The father reached for the small wooden charm hanging by the door, touching it with familiar calm, not from fear, but from habit passed quietly through generations. And the night deepened around them, not as an unknown force, but as an old companion. Yet the night held one more secret. In medieval Europe, the beginning of night was not the same as the beginning of sleep. There was a soft space between the two, an hour where thoughts slowed, voices faded, and bodies prepared for deeper rest. Inside the cottage, the fire dimmed into glowing embers, holding the final warmth of the day. The father rose and placed a thin piece of wood carefully onto the coals, and watched as the flame touched it with gentle, curious light. It was not meant to brighten the room, only to keep the hearth alive through the coldest stretch of night. The mother sat near the bedding, her hands resting in her lap, her breath calm and steady. The children shifted beneath the blankets, finding small pockets of warmth between their bodies and the heavy wool. The dog near the doorway lifted its head again, listened to the soft rhythm of the night, and settled back down with a quiet sigh. Everything in the cottage seemed to breathe together. But the darkness outside shaped the world in its own way. Beyond the walls, fields stretched under moonlight as if wrapped in a pale silver scarf. Trees gathered into gentle shapes, their branches barely moving in the light breeze. The path leading toward the cottage appeared almost timeless, a simple line connecting the home to the rest of the silent land. Far in the distance, a faint flicker marked another cottage, another family preparing for rest, another hearth glowing softly in the vast quiet of the countryside. The medieval night was wide and full of space, yet homes felt like small worlds of their own, held gently in the center of the great dark. And inside one such home, the family slowly drifted toward stillness. The mother lay down beside the children, pulling the wool blanket closer around them. Her breath warmed the cool air near their faces. The father settled on the other side, letting the straw mattress adjust beneath his weight. The room dimmed further as the embers slipped from bright orange into warm, pulsing red. The shadows softened, blurred into the corners until they became part of the room's quiet rhythm. Children's breathing deepened. Their small movements grew slower. Their bodies relaxed into the familiar warmth of home. The mother closed her eyes. The father placed a final piece of wood just close enough to pick up heat, but not enough to flare brightly. He watched for a moment as the fire accepted it, then let his eyes rest. Outside, wind moved gently across the field. The owl returned to its perch. A distant river whispered softly beneath the moonlit sky. Inside, peace settled like a blanket over the room. And in this tender stillness, the medieval world eased fully into night, the first gentle descent toward the deeper sleep waiting ahead. The day was gone. The home was quiet. The night had claimed the land with soft hands. This was the true beginning of medieval rest. But even in a simple home, night carried small mysteries. After the last threads of daylight faded beyond the low hills, the peasant home grew softer in tone, slower in movement, and warmer in feeling. The world outside had stepped fully into night, but inside the home, the evening still lingered like a gentle echo. The cottage was made of wattle and daub, its walls thick but uneven in texture, holding the day's warmth deep within them. A low roof rested overhead, its beams darkened by years of smoke. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters, sage, lavender, thyme, their scents woven into the air like faint memories from seasons long past. The fire in the hearth glowed with a calm, steady breath. It did not roar, it did not flare. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat for the entire home. The embers shifted with quiet cracks, and thin lines of light moved across the packed earth floor. The family had finished supper not long before. The wooden bowls still held traces of grain and broth. A clay pot rested near the hearth, giving off the warm, earthy smell of lentils and root vegetables. The mother wiped the table with slow movements of a cloth that had been washed so many times its fabric had softened to the texture of worn wool. Yet the night had its own rhythm here. The father sat on a low stool, repairing a small tool by the light of the fire. His fingers were rough from labor, but his movements were patient and steady. Each quiet scrape of metal against stone felt almost like part of the evening's music. Outside, the sounds of the village faded. No carts, no voices, no footsteps. Only the distant rustle of wind moving through dry grass and the faint creaking of a wooden fence. Inside, the children sat close together, legs tucked beneath a single blanket. They watched shadows move across the rafters, the shifting shapes making soft patterns on the ceiling. One child whispered a question and another answered with a sleepy murmur, their voices blending into the warm air like threads of wool resting on a loom. The mother knelt near the bedding, a straw-filled mattress covered with wool blankets. She checked it carefully, pressing her hand into the straw, listening for the coarse pieces that sometimes poked through the fabric. She lifted the blanket, shook it gently to release trapped air, and laid it back down, smoothing it in quiet circles. A faint breeze slipped through the cracks in the shutter, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. The mother instinctively reached up, adjusted the wooden latch, and made sure it held firmly. Cold air could steal warmth quickly in the deepest hours of night. But behind this simple routine lies something quiet and beautiful. The evening was the one time that the family was together without tasks demanding their hands. No fields to tend, no animals to feed, no distant work calling the father away. Only the calm, shared breath of people who knew one another as deeply as they knew the land around them. The father finished his small repair, rolled his shoulders slowly, and placed the tool beside the door where he would need it in the morning. He glanced at the children, smiling in a way softened by the dim firelight. The mother sat beside him. For a moment they said nothing. Silence in the cottage was never empty. It held warmth, memory, and the gentle hum of embers shifting in the hearth. A child rested their head against the mother's lap. She ran a hand through their hair, her fingers moving soft, slow care. Another child leaned into the father's shoulder, seeking warmth from the wool tunic he wore. The fire glowed brighter for a moment as a piece of wood settled deeper into the coals. The light moved across the room in steady, warm waves. Everything felt close. Everything felt safe. Yet among straw and wool, one ritual stood out. As the deeper night settled over the land, the family prepared quietly for the first stretch of rest. The room grew dimmer with each passing minute, for the fire had retreated into a slow glow, a warm amber heart pulsing at the edge of the darkness. Shadows melted into the corners. Shapes softened. The cottage felt smaller, but warmer too, as if the night folded its hands gently around the home. The mother reached up to the rafters to check the bundles of herbs once more. Even though she had touched them earlier, she did it again, a quiet habit learned from her own mother. Lavender to calm the breath, chamomile to soothe the mind, rosemary to keep the night steady. She did not do this from superstition. She did it out of comfort, out of memory, out of the soft belief that small things mattered on long, quiet nights. The father brought a clay cup to the hearth, warming the bottom of it near the fading embers. He filled it with a little water and handed it to the mother. She drank slowly, letting the warmth move through her chest. But the cottage held more stories beneath its quiet surface. The children whispered again, this time about the sounds outside. A distant bleat from a goat, a soft hoot from an owl, the faint creaking of a tree branch moving in the breeze. To them, these sounds were part of the night's familiar language. Nothing strange, nothing threatening, just reminders that the world outside continued its own slow rhythm. One child shifted closer to the hearth, letting their toes feel the last waves of heat. Another adjusted the blanket so it covered both of them evenly. Their movements were small, but filled with the quiet trust that the night was kind within these walls. The father rose from his stool and closed the shutter more tightly. A small draft had slipped in, carrying the smell of cold soil. He placed a piece of cloth against the lower gap to keep the warmth inside. He moved with care, as if trying not to disturb the peace that had settled over the cottage. Yet the night had one more layer to reveal. The mother lay the children down on the straw mattress. The straw rustled beneath them, shifting into comfortable shapes as they settled into place. She pulled the wool blanket up to their chins. The blanket was heavy, thick with lanolin, woven by hand long ago. It held the scent of sheep's wool, the faint aroma of smoke, and the softness of many nights spent beneath it. The children relaxed immediately, their breath falling into slow, warm waves. The father moved to his own place by the bedding. He placed a hand briefly on each child's shoulder, a gesture so gentle that it blended into the rhythm of sleep itself. He then sat, letting the dim firelight brush across his face. His eyes were half closed, not from exhaustion, but from the peace of the moment. But even here, the night held one more secret. Families in medieval cottages did not fall asleep all at once. There was always a quiet stretch between wakefulness and rest, where breath slowed, voices faded, and the home settled. The embers glowed, a deep, slow red. The air cooled slightly as the last flames slipped into sleep. The herbs above the rafters gave off the faintest trace of fragrance. The dog curled closer to the door, guarding without alertness, simply being present. In this dim, warm world, the family drifted into their first sleep, a sleep shaped by straw, wool, firelight, and the gentle pulse of night. Outside, the village was silent now, a cluster of resting homes, each holding its own small universe of warmth. Inside the cottage, the first chapter of the night fell softly across the family. Darkness deepened, breathing softened, thoughts loosened, and the night carried them gently into the quiet heart of sleep. But there is one detail we rarely notice. The deepest hours of the medieval night were not a single block of sleep. They were divided gently into two stretches, two calm descents, separated by a quiet space when the mind drifted awake while the world remained still. This was a natural rhythm, not forced, not expected, simply lived. After the first sleep, the cottage carried a different kind of silence, a thicker, warmer stillness that settled around every piece of wood, every strand of straw, every slow breath inside the home. Yet hidden beneath this silence lies something unexpected. The first sleep had passed. The family did not wake all at once. It was a soft stirring, a slow shift under blankets, a quiet adjustment of limbs, the faintest sound of wool brushing against skin. The fire had settled deeply into its embers. No flames reached upward now. Instead, a quiet glow pulsed beneath a thin layer of ash, like a gentle memory of warmth breathing steadily at the edge of the room. The mother opened her eyes first. She did not sit up immediately. She rested a moment, listening to the quiet of the cottage. The breathing of her children formed a soft rhythm, the kind of sound that felt like a lullaby woven into the walls. She reached toward the blanket, pulling it slightly higher over the children. The wool was cool on the surface, but warm beneath, holding the heat of their shared sleep. The father stirred next. He did not rise. He simply shifted, adjusting the straw beneath him with small, instinctive motions that did not disturb the peace. There is a small truth that quietly changes everything. The time between sleeps was often used for the gentlest tasks, not work, not chores, just small rituals that belonged only to these quiet hours. The father reached for the small clay cup near the hearth, feeling how cool it had become. He drank a slow sip of water, letting it settle his breath before placing the cup back on the ground with a soft tap. The mother rubbed her hands together slowly, warming her fingers before checking the herbs tied near the wall. The faint scent of lavender rose into the air as she brushed past them, soft, calming, carrying a sense of safety that threaded through the dim room. Outside, the night held its breath. Wind moved gently across the field. Snow somewhere in the distance shifted under its own weight. A small animal, perhaps a fox, stepped lightly through the dark. Nothing rushed, nothing broke the stillness. But what happens next is something we often forget. The quiet hour between sleeps was a time for reflection. Thoughts drifted like slow-moving clouds. Soft memories rose without warning of past harvests, of gentle summers, of moments spoken long ago. The mother pressed her palm against the warmest part of the straw mattress, feeling the stored heat slowly fade. She listened to the rhythm of the children's breath and let her mind rest in the comfort of the moment. The father watched the embers breathe in the hearth. He knew how long they would last. He knew when the fire needed tending. He knew the language of night warmth as well as he knew the shape of his land. Sometimes he added a small piece of wood, thin, dry, just enough to keep the glow alive without awakening the flames. Sometimes he simply watched as the light throbbed gently beneath its cover of ash. Children, half aware, shifted deeper into the blankets, seeking the warmth that never drifted far from their bodies. The dog at the door lifted its head for a moment, then settled back down with a low sigh that blended perfectly with the quiet of the room. And this is where something deeper appears. The family did not speak. They did not need to. The silence held everything: warmth, memory, familiarity, safety. This gentle waking was as much a part of medieval sleep as the sleep itself. It was a bridge between two stretches of rest, a moment of peace woven into the very structure of the night. But the night held one more secret. The quiet hours between sleeps were not empty. They carried a gentle purpose, a space for the body to adjust, for the fire to breathe, for the mind to wander without the weight of the day upon it. Inside the cottage, the darkness was soft, never complete. The embers cast a faint glow that barely touched the edges of the room, yet held everything together with a warm, steady presence. The mother sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. She listened to the night as though it were a story whispered just for her. The sound of wind brushing the shutters came and went like a calm tide. Each gentle gust slipped along the wood with the softness of a hand passing over cloth. She reached toward a small bundle of herbs set beside the bedding. Her fingers brushed lavender, its scent rising in a faint, soothing breath. She held it for a moment, closed her eyes, and let its calmness settle in her chest. Yet hidden in this stillness lies something ancient. People in the medieval world trusted the night in ways modern minds rarely imagine. They knew its patterns, its rhythms, its small behaviors. They knew which creaks in the wall were harmless, which groans in the roof were natural, which breaths of wind carried meaning, and which were simply passing through. The father rose quietly, stepping carefully across the packed earth floor. He moved with familiarity, avoiding the places where the straw beneath the floor was uneven or noisy. He reached the hearth and knelt before the glow. The embers radiated a gentle heat, not enough to brighten the room, but enough to keep the deep cold away. He lifted a small piece of wood and laid it beside the coals, touching it lightly so it would catch slowly without waking anyone. The ember light responded, flaring softly, then settling into its earlier rhythm. The father sat back, feeling the warmth touch his hands. He breathed out slowly, allowing his breath to join with the fire's. There is a small truth that we often overlook. During these quiet hours, families sometimes exchanged soft words meant only for the night. The mother whispered, not a full sentence, just a gentle thought about tomorrow's tasks. The father answered with a few calm words, his voice low and warm. Nothing urgent, nothing heavy, only small pieces of life spoken in a place where silence felt like the softest blanket. The children shifted beneath the covers. One child rolled slightly, seeking the warmest part of the blanket. Another pressed their cheek deeper into the straw-filled mattress, finding comfort in its familiar shape. Their breaths rose and fell with the steady rhythm of early dreams. The dog near the door stretched its legs slowly, its claws brushing lightly over the floor. Then it curled again, nose tucked beneath its tail, fully trusting the quiet of the home. But something else stirred in the deepest parts of the night. This gentle waking between sleeps was often a time for quiet awareness. Awareness of the warmth inside the cottage, awareness of the cold pressing softly outside, awareness of the fire's breath, the straw's scent, the wool's weight, the herb's calm fragrance moving like a thin ribbon through the air. The mother lay down again, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. The father followed, letting the straw adjust beneath him as he settled into a familiar hollow. He placed a hand lightly on the wool edge of the children's blanket, a gesture of comfort more instinctive than intentional. The embers glowed steadily, their light pulsing like the slow heartbeat of the home. Outside, the night stretched wide around the cottage, filled with moonlight, faint wind, and the murmured life of distant fields. Inside, stillness settled once more, so deep that it seemed to cradle every breath. And as this quiet hour reached its gentle end, the medieval family drifted naturally into the second sleep, a deeper, calmer rest, guided by warmth, ritual, and the ancient rhythm of the night. But the night held a deeper layer that most of us forget. The deepest hours of medieval darkness were unlike anything we feel today. There were no lamps, no distant roads glowing faintly, no hum of the world beyond the walls. Only silence. Thick, warm, almost touchable. It was during these hours that time itself seemed to slow, as though the night wanted the world to rest a little longer before moving on. Inside the cottage, the embers glowed beneath their thin coat of ash. Their light no longer filled the room. It breathed inside it, soft and low, like a warm memory refusing to fade. The air had cooled, but not unkindly. The warmth stored in the walls still held the family close, as they shifted gently in their sleep. Yet hidden beneath this stillness lies something subtle. This hour between sleeps was often the quietest moment of the entire night. Even the wind seemed slower, its movements softer as it slipped around the edges of the home. The mother stirred first, just as she had in the earlier hours. Her breathing deepened and then softened again as she opened her eyes to the faint glow from the hearth. She did not rise immediately. She listened, not for danger, but for the familiar sounds that confirmed the world was peaceful. The even breathing of the children, the low sigh of the dog, the faint, steady exhale of the wind against the shutters. Nothing felt out of place. She sat up slowly, not from worry, but from habit. These quiet moments were hers, a time when the night seemed to open, like a still lake, reflecting only calmness. Her fingers brushed the blanket. Wool, warm, faintly scented with smoke and lanolin. The fabric softened from years of use, woven by hands long gone, but still present in every thread. But there is one detail we rarely notice. The quiet hour was not meant for long thoughts or heavy worries. It was for simple presence. The mother reached toward a small basket near the bedding. Inside were bits of dried lavender, a few sprigs of thyme, and a small wooden charm carved by her own father when she was still a child. She touched it lightly, not for protection in the modern sense, but because the texture of the wood felt grounding in her palm, a reminder of years before, of nights similar to this one, held together by the same slow rhythm. The father stirred next, opening his eyes as though waking from a dream that left no trace behind. He inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs, then exhaled with a long, steady sigh that blended into the soft quiet of the room. He sat up, stretching his hands toward the low glow of the hearth. The warmth touched his palms gently, faint but steady, like a familiar companion. Sometimes he would speak a word or two. Tonight, a quiet whisper, still warm. The mother nodded, her voice barely above a breath. Still warm. But the night kept something else within its silence. The mind during these hours was softer than during the day. Thoughts moved slowly, unrushed, untangled. The father thought of the tasks tomorrow might bring, not with pressure, but with calm acceptance. The fields, the tools, the firewood that needed splitting, the animals that needed tending. The mother thought of the children, their sleepy faces, their small hands clutching the blankets. She brushed a gentle hand across one child's hair, feeling the warmth rise beneath her touch as the child shifted and pressed closer into the bedding. The dog lifted its head, ears twitched once, then lay back down with a soft thump that settled into the floor. This hour between sleeps was not for fear, not for tension, not for urgency. It was a pause, a breath, a moment where the world offered peace without asking. But the next moment brings a quiet revelation. As the deepest stretch of night unfolded, the cottage seemed to float in its own world, cut off from the darkness outside, carried gently by warmth, held together by breath and emberlight. The mother lay down again, but her eyes stayed open for a few moments more, not from worry, but from the simple human instinct to witness the stillness around her. The fire pulsed softly, its glow traced slow patterns along the wooden beams, moving like drifting water. Each pulse faded gently into the next, with no urgency, no sharpness, only calm continuity. The father watched it too. His breathing matched the glow, slow rising, slow settling. He leaned slightly toward the warmth, letting the heat touch his cheeks and soften the cool air on his skin. Yet beneath this soft quiet, something ancient stirred. The medieval night was not a silent void. It had its own voice, a voice so subtle that only those who lived close to nature could hear it clearly. The wind brushed the shutters with long, even strokes. Sometimes it paused, as if listening back to the cottage itself. Sometimes it returned, with a whisper of cold that threaded through the cracks in the wood, but never enough to steal the room's warmth. In the distance, a single owl called out, a slow, hollow sound that drifted across the fields like the echo of a dream. Inside, the children shifted again. One drew closer to the warmth of the mother's body. Another loosened an arm from underneath the blanket before pulling it back under to escape the cool edge of the night. The dog lifted its head, not from alarm, simply from curiosity at the owl's call, then settled back down, nose tucked once more beneath its tail. But there was something else, a small truth that shaped the rhythm of medieval nights. This quiet period between first sleep and second was often used for the gentlest of tasks. Sometimes the mother would whisper a soft prayer, her words blending with the crackle of the embers. A prayer not for safety, but for gratitude, for rest, for the warmth that held them through the night. Sometimes the father would rise to check the livestock outside. Not tonight, but on colder nights when the wind carried hints of frost, or when distant sounds suggested animals might be restless. Tonight was still. Tonight held no demands. He remained near the hearth, sitting in the low glow with his hands resting loosely on his knees. The mother reached toward the herbs again, touching a sprig of rosemary and letting its scent rise gently in the dark. The smell mixed with the faint smoke in the air, a combination that belonged uniquely to medieval homes in the middle of the night. Warmth, herbs, smoke, straw, wool, and silence. A tapestry woven from things so simple, yet so deeply grounding. But even here, the night had one more secret to give. Sleep returned slowly, not in a sudden wave, but like a tide rising inch by inch. The mother settled into the bedding, her breathing falling back into the slow rhythm of rest. The father lay down beside her, turning only once to adjust the straw beneath him. The blanket pulled over them held the warmth they had built during the first stretch of rest. Its weight felt protective, anchoring them gently against the cool air above. The embers dimmed further, their glow no longer bright enough to reach the walls, but strong enough to cast a small island of warmth across the center of the room. The children's breath deepened again, drifting back toward dreams hidden beneath the blanket's heavy warmth. Outside, the world softened. The wind quieted, the fields rested. The night watched over everything with slow, patient calm. And as this quiet hour reached its natural end, the family slipped gently into their second sleep, a deeper, calmer, more dream-filled rest that carried them toward dawn with the slow rhythm of ancient night. The cottage breathed with them. The fire pulsed one last time before settling fully into warmth. Nothing rushed, nothing startled, nothing broke the peace. Only quiet, only warmth, only the deep night guiding them softly into the final stretch of rest before the first pale hints of morning. But behind thin walls, nights were never as silent as we imagine. In a medieval town, night did not fall in the same way it did in the countryside. It settled slowly, threading itself between narrow streets, slipping around stone corners, and resting softly on timber-framed houses lined close together. The scent of the day still lingered, warm bread from a baker's hearth, smoke from nearby workshops, the faint trace of wool, leather, and dust that clung to every street and doorway. As darkness deepened, the town changed tone. Not louder, not chaotic, simply different. A quiet woven from many small sounds, instead of a single silence. Yet there was one sound the city never truly lost. Footsteps. Slow, measured, soft against the cobblestones. The night watch moved through the streets at an unhurried pace, their breath rising in faint clouds, their lanterns swinging gently in hand. The warm glow created small circles of light that followed them through the narrow lanes like tame fireflies. Inside one of the timber houses, a family settled into the first rest. The home was narrow, with low ceilings and walls that leaned slightly inward as though the building were holding itself steady against time. The fire in the hearth was small, but warm enough to keep the chill away from the room. Its glow touched the wooden beams with a faint golden color and rested softly on the rough plaster walls. Children lay under wool blankets, their beds placed close to one another to share warmth in the coolness of the night. The mother folded a cloth near the hearth, her hands moving slowly, keeping the final tasks of the day calm and measured. The father adjusted the shutters, checking the latch with a practiced, gentle touch. The window pane rattled faintly as a breeze wound its way between the tight clusters of houses. But the town had its own kind of stillness. Through the thin walls, the faint murmur of a neighbor's voice slipped into the room, not clear enough to hear words, only the warm tone of someone finishing a late conversation in the house next door. A cat moved somewhere on the roof above, its paws making soft, careful taps across the old wooden beams. A distant tavern door creaked, closing for the final time as the last patrons stepped out into the dimly lit street. The town exhaled in small, scattered sounds, gentle, familiar, never sharp. The mother sat near the bedding and placed her hand on the blanket, checking the warmth beneath it. The children were already drifting, their breaths steady, their limbs relaxed. Above them, hanging from a ceiling beam, a bunch of dried herbs swayed slightly in the subtle draft. Mint, sage, a little lavender. Their scent mixed with the smell of old wood and the faint trace of cooling embers. Yet the night held more layers than the family could see. In the room above, an apprentice cobbler lay awake, listening to the sound of the street below. He lived alone, but the presence of neighbors close through the walls kept the night from feeling empty. Across the street, a tailor trimmed a loose thread before setting his tools aside. The snip of scissors drifted faintly into the night air. Somewhere farther down the lane, a baby cried softly before being lulled back to sleep by a quiet, soothing hum. Inside the family's home, all these sounds blended into a gentle background, not noise, but a kind of urban lullaby made of simple, familiar lives resting close to one another. The father sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his boots with slow, careful motions. The scrape of leather against the wooden floor echoed softly in the small room. The mother placed a final piece of wood beside the hearth to feed the fire during the night, without brightening the room too much. Children shifted, seeking warmer places under the blanket, and the wool rustled in calm waves. The night gathered around them, not silent, but kind. And as the first stretch of rest began, the town breathed gently along with them, each home part of a larger, quiet world woven through narrow streets and the soft pulse of lantern light. But behind this simple scene lies a deeper story. As the night settled further over the town, the soundscape shifted once more. Streets grew quieter, doors closed softly, steps faded into the distance. The whisper of late-night life became softer than the flutter of cloth. Inside the timber house, the family's breath deepened as they drifted through their first stretch of sleep. The room warmed slowly from the heat of their bodies and the gentle glow of the hearth. The father lay on a straw mattress, covered with a thick wool blanket dyed in muted shades that had faded with years of washing. The mother rested beside the children, her arm curled lightly around them in a gesture as natural as breathing. Outside, the night watch passed again, their lantern glowing across the wall with the soft golden shimmer. The light brushed the edges of the shutters, then dissolved into darkness as their steps faded down the narrow street. Yet the town's quiet had more to reveal. The beams of the house creaked softly as the temperature changed. Old timber responded to the cool air with long, slow movements that sounded almost like sighs. A faint draft slipped through a gap between two boards in the wall. Not cold enough to disturb the sleepers, but present enough to make a dried bunch of mint sway gently from the ceiling. The movement released a soft scent that drifted down toward the bedding, cool, herbal, calming. It mingled with the warm smell of wool and the faint sweetness of smoldering embers. Through the wall, another family could be heard, not speaking, not moving loudly, just the steady rhythm of their rest echoing faintly across thin wood. The town did not sleep in isolation. It slept as one breathing body. Yet something within this darkness carried a quiet warmth. A child stirred and reached instinctively for the mother's hand. Her touch was warm, and the child settled again with a small exhale that disappeared into the dim air. Above, the apprentice cobbler shifted on his own straw mattress, adjusting the blanket over his shoulders. He listened to the faint creaks from the house below, finding comfort in knowing others rested near him. A cat leapt from one roof to another, its paws tapping softly against wooden beams. The sound moved quickly across the street and vanished into the distance. Farther away, a dog barked once, a short sound that broke the stillness for a heartbeat before melting back into the night. Inside the home, the mother half awoke, opened her eyes for a moment, and listened. Not with fear, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone used to reading the night. She brushed her thumb over the blanket's edge, feeling its familiar weave. Then she closed her eyes again. But even in the calmest moments, the town night carried one more secret. Second sleep came to town families much like it did in the countryside, slowly, gently, with the sense of being carried by the night rather than pushed into rest. The embers dimmed further, reducing the room to warm outlines and soft shadows. The fire's glow touched only the edge of the hearth, but even that small light felt like a steady companion. The father breathed deeply, his chest rising in slow waves. The mother shifted slightly to pull the blanket closer around the children's shoulders. The walls of the home held the warmth of the day for as long as they could. Stone and timber absorbed heat like old memories and released it in slow, gentle breaths. The town grew even quieter. Lanterns were extinguished one by one. The last tavern sign creaked softly as wind nudged it and then moved on. Inside the family's small home, thoughts faded, breaths deepened, stillness grew. Second sleep arrived without announcement, settling over them like a thicker blanket drawn softly across their bodies. And so the town, with all its narrow streets and clustered houses, rested together in a shared quiet, a gentle web of dreams woven through wood, stone, and the steady breath of night. Behind these wooden floors, midnight carried its own quiet world. Living above a shop in a medieval town was a life held between two layers, the busy breath of the day below and the gentle stillness of the night above. When the last customers left and the door of the shop closed with a soft thud, a different kind of quiet began to rise. Not the deep silence of countryside nights, but a soft, woven stillness made from fading voices, cool stone, and lantern light drifting between buildings. The family living above the shop felt this shift every evening. The staircase creaked as they climbed to their rooms. The warm smell of wood, flour, leather, or whatever goods they worked with followed them upward, faint but familiar, a reminder of the day now fading. Yet hidden beneath this silence lies something unexpected. The rooms above the shop were small, but warm. Timber beams crossed overhead, their edges softened by dim firelight. A small hearth glowed near the corner, its embers reflecting against clay bowls and the iron tools hanging on the wall. Through the floorboards came the last traces of shop life. A faint tap of wood settling, the soft click of metal cooling, the slow settling of shelves holding goods for tomorrow's trade. The mother folded blankets near the bedding, her movements slow and gentle. The wool felt warm in her hands, still holding a little heat from being close to the hearth earlier in the evening. The father checked the shutters, peering out over the narrow street below. Lanterns glowed in small pools of light, marking the paths of lake travelers and the steady rounds of the night watch. From above, the town looked softer, like a patchwork of roofs and shadows held gently beneath the dark sky. But there is a small truth that quietly shapes these hours. Life above the shop carried a closeness that countryside homes never knew. Neighbors lived only a few steps away, and even in the quietest nights, soft hints of their lives slipped through walls and across rooftops. A muffled laugh from next door, the creak of a bucket being moved, the slow closing of a window shutter. Not intrusive, not sharp, just small signs that others nearby were settling into their own rest. The children lay on the straw mattress near the corner of the room, their heads resting on simple linen pillows. They whispered softly, comments about the day, questions about the sounds outside, dream fragments already forming at the edge of their voices. The mother smoothed their blanket, pressing it gently around their shoulders. The father removed his boots and placed them beside the wall with careful quiet, not wanting to wake the apprentice who slept in the room next door. A faint breeze slipped in from the narrow window above the stairs. It carried the cool smell of cobblestones, damp wood, and distant smoke from hearths still glowing across the town. But the night kept more secrets above these shops. The roof overhead held faint echoes from the world outside, a pigeon shifting in its nest, a stray cat jumping from beam to beam, the slow drip of water from a gutter touched by evening dew. Below, in the shop, the day's warmth rose upward in soft waves. The faint smell of whatever they sold, cloth, herbs, bread, tools, became part of the air upstairs, a quiet reminder of the world waiting just beneath their feet. The children drifted into their first sleep as the parents sat close together near the hearth. The embers crackled softly, casting a warm glow on the uneven boards of the floor. The shadows stretched long and gentle across the room, never sharp, always soft at the edges. The father set a small piece of wood near the heart of the fire, letting it warm slowly without breaking the dim calm. The mother touched his arm lightly, a gesture that said everything without needing words. The night deepened around them. The town softened. The shop rested. And the small family above it eased gently into the quiet that only midnight could bring. But what the night revealed above these shops was something deeper. As the first stretch of sleep settled over the small home above the shop, a gentler rhythm took hold. The warmth of the hearth dimmed into a soft red pulse, its glow touching the floor with thin ribbons of light. The children's breathing grew slow and steady, their bodies relaxing into the familiar weight of wool and straw. The mother adjusted her blanket, pulling it closer to her chest as the cool air of midnight slipped gently through the cracks of the window. The father closed his eyes for a moment, but did not drift fully into sleep yet. He listened to the house, to the shop below, to the town beyond the shutters. Not from fear, not from worry, but from the instinct of someone who lived between worlds. Yet hidden in this half-silence was the soft pulse of urban life. Below their feet, the shop settled. The shelves creaked softly as the wood cooled. The last traces of warmth from the day's work rose upward in thin currents, touching the floorboards with a gentle breath. A signboard outside, hanging from a metal hook, swayed slightly in the breeze. It made a soft tapping sound, slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat echoing from the street. Somewhere farther down the lane, a low murmur drifted from a tavern that had not yet closed. The sound was faint, more felt than heard. A warm hum that faded as the tavern's last lantern was extinguished. From beyond the rooftops, a church bell rang, one single tone marking the depth of night. Not loud, not sharp, just a reminder that time flowed gently through the sleeping town. But above the shop, midnight carried its own rituals. The father finally lay down, letting the straw beneath him shift into a familiar hollow. The mother rested beside him, her breath warm in the cool room. Between sleeps, people in medieval towns often stirred softly, not fully awake, not fully asleep. The mother's eyes opened again, not from noise, but from the natural rhythm of the night itself. She rose quietly, not wanting to wake the children, and stepped toward the small window overlooking the street. The shutters creaked lightly as she opened them just a little. Cold air entered the room, touching her cheeks with the freshness of stone and night. She looked down at the empty lane below. Lanterns flickered in the distance. Their glow moved gently as the night watch continued their rounds. The sound of their steps echoed against the close walls, steady, slow, reassuring. The mother closed the shutters softly and returned to the bedding, her movements light, as though she were part of the night rather than a visitor in it. But this hour held one more quiet truth. The father stirred next, opening his eyes just as the embers shifted in the hearth. He rose, placed a thin piece of wood near the glow, and watched as it caught the warmth slowly, a soft flare, a brief breath of orange, then a gentle fade back into deeper red. He whispered a few words, a thought about the morning tasks, a hope that the weather would stay calm for the week ahead. The mother nodded, her eyes half closed, her voice soft. For a moment, they simply sat near the fading fire, listening to the quiet that belonged only to the deepest hours. Then they lay down again, drawing the blanket over them, their bodies relaxing together into the softness of the straw. Yet the town remained quietly alive around them. A cat moved across the roof. A wooden beam settled with a long, slow creak. Wind brushed past the shutters in a gentle sigh. A distant dog barked once and then grew silent again. These sounds did not disturb the family. They shaped the night. They made the room feel held, protected by the presence of life moving softly through the dark. The embers dimmed until they glowed like a thin line of warmth at the base of the hearth. The children shifted slightly, drawing nearer to each other in their second sleep. The mother breathed deeply, the father's breath matching hers a moment later. And so the family above the shop sank together into the slow, gentle river of second sleep, held by warmth, wrapped in shadows, and carried by the soft pulse of a town that dreamed just beyond their shutters. The night moved on with quiet, patient steps, guiding them toward the pale beginning of dawn. But even behind silken curtains, the night had its own rules. A noble chamber in medieval Europe was a world unlike any other, not silent, not cold at heart, but wrapped in layers of stone, fabric, and ritual. The walls were thick, made to guard against winter winds and the quiet dangers of the outside world. Yet at night, they held a chill that even the richest tapestries could not fully chase away. A single candle burned near the window, its flames steady, its light warm against polished wooden chests and the carved bedposts rising high above the floor. The noblewoman sat on the edge of the bed, her gown soft around her, made of wool layered beneath flowing linen. She brushed her hair slowly, the comb moving through long strands that caught the candlelight like threads of gold. Yet nobles followed a habit far different from ours. Before sleep, there were quiet rituals, not grand, not lavish, but deeply familiar. A servant moved through the chamber with soft, careful steps, placing a warmed brick beneath the woolen covers to chase away the cold that lived deep in the stone floor. Another servant extinguished all but 2 candles, their hands steady, their movements slow, so the flames dimmed without smoke. A cloak lined with fur was draped across a carved chair, ready for the coldest hours of the night. And near the hearth, a low fire whispered softly, a small glow that gave comfort more than heat. Yet something inside these rooms felt quieter than any other place. Unlike the townhouses where sounds slipped through walls, or the cottages where family warmth filled the air, the noble chamber carried a different kind of stillness, a stillness that came from space. The room was large, the ceilings high, the shadows stretched far across stone and tapestry. The noblewoman looked toward the window. Moonlight fell across the sill in a pale silver line. Beyond it, the courtyard lay still, a quiet world of stone paths, resting horses, and torches burning low along the outer wall. She listened to the night. It was calm, gentle, not empty, but composed. A distant guard coughed once, a horse shifted in the stable. Wind brushed against the tall tower stones like a slow, wandering hand. Everything outside moved with deliberate softness, but the chamber held its own sounds too. The crackle of the low fire, the faint rustling of silk as the noblewoman changed into her night garments. Fine linen, soft wool, layered lightly for the season. The comb resting on the table with the faintest wooden tap. A servant's steps retreating down the hallway outside the door. Nothing rushed. Nothing broke the harmony of the room. Yet there was one custom nobles kept before letting sleep take them. The noblewoman walked to the small shrine set into the corner of the chamber. She touched a carved wooden figure gently, closed her eyes, and breathed a few quiet words, not out of fear, but out of tradition woven through her upbringing. Then she returned to the bed, lifting the heavy covers with slow, graceful motions. The warmed brick beneath the blankets radiated a soft heat, enough to melt the first sting of cold from the stone floor. She slid beneath the covers, her body adjusting to the weight of the layered fabrics, wool, linen, fur-lined trim, textures that caught warmth and held it close. a servant extinguished the final candle by the door, leaving only the glow of embers and the faint silver trace of the moon. The noblewoman exhaled slowly, her breath rising into the cool room like a thin, warm cloud, and the chamber deepened into stillness, rich, layered, as soft as silk, and as steady as stone. But even behind the comfort of silk, the night carried one more layer. The noblewoman lay beneath the heavy covers, her breath easing into the cool air, the warmth of the bed slowly rising around her. The fire in the hearth glowed low and steady, its embers resting in a soft red curve against the stone grate. Its light flickered gently across the carved chest at the foot of the bed and along the tapestries that softened the tall walls. One tapestry showed a hunting scene, figures frozen mid-step, their woven garments catching the ember light in threads of gold and deep green. Another showed a garden, vine leaves curling in embroidered patterns across the surface. In the dim room, the images seemed to shift with each breath of the fire. But nobles slept differently than the common folk. Their beds were high, filled with layers of straw, feathers, and wool. The mattress sat on a wooden frame which creaked softly when the noblewoman turned her head on the linen pillow. The blankets were heavy, so heavy that lifting them required slow, careful movement, yet they held warmth better than anything else in the room. She adjusted the fur at her shoulders, letting its soft weight settle around her like a warm cloud. Its scent, clean, slightly earthy, mixed gently with the smell of smoke and the faint sweetness of beeswax from the extinguished candles. Yet nobles also shared the night with their attendants. Outside the chamber, a servant rested near the doorway, wrapped in a cloak, ready to wake should the noblewoman call. Their breathing could be heard faintly, a soft, steady rhythm that drifted through the wooden door like a quiet reminder that she was never alone. Another servant slept farther down the corridor, closer to the stairs leading to the great hall. The sound of their turning on a straw mat traveled lightly along the stone floor as a whisper of cloth. Far below, in the castle kitchen, a final ember glowed beneath the ashes of the cook fire. It released a last breath of warmth before settling for the night. But the castle itself seemed alive at midnight. Stone held sound differently than wood. It carried it farther, echoed it gently, softened its edges. A distant door closed somewhere deep in the fortress, a long, slow groan of timber. The noblewoman knew that sound well, a guard shifting between posts. Sometimes the banners in the courtyard rustled in the wind, their fabric brushing against the poles in slow, sweeping motions. Even that faint sound traveled up the tower walls and into her room as a calming whisper. A horse in the stable stamped its hoof once and fell quiet again. Footsteps of a guard passed beneath her window, steady, rhythmic, blending with the soft pulse of torchlight flickering along the stone path. But there was one final ritual before the deeper sleep arrived. The noblewoman opened her eyes just enough to look toward the window. The moon had risen higher now, sending a thin band of pale light across the floor. That light touched her gown where it hung on a carved chair, rested on the edge of a chest with metal fittings, and slipped across the floor until it reached the base of the bed. She watched it for a moment. The stillness, the simplicity, the calm. Then she exhaled softly, allowing her breath to blend with the quiet air around her. Her thoughts loosened, her body sank deeper into the warmth. The weight of the blankets felt grounding, steady, safe. The embers dimmed further, their glow turning into a soft, pulsing amber. The servant outside the door shifted lightly, then grew still again. The tapestry leaves no longer seemed to move, only rest. And so, wrapped in silk, wool, and moonlight, the noble woman drifted into her first sleep, a gentle descent shaped by stone walls, soft fabrics, and the quiet heartbeat of a fortress at rest. Nothing hurried, nothing disturbed the calm. The chamber belonged wholly to the night, and the night held her with the same care as it did every home, from the humblest cottage to the highest tower. But within these stone walls, sleep was a discipline. The monastery at night was unlike any place in the medieval world. It did not grow quiet. It simply shifted into a different kind of breathing. The tall stone buildings, lined in narrow courtyards and covered in cool shadows, held on to the last light of day for a long time before sinking into a deep stillness. The air smelled of wax, linen robes dried near the hearth, and the faint sweetness of incense left behind from the evening prayers. Inside the monastery's great hall, the last candle was extinguished with a soft whisper of breath. The light faded, and the room settled into calm darkness, broken only by the faint glow of embers hidden beneath ash. Yet monks had a nightly routine we rarely hear about. Sleep did not come all at once. It arrived gently, after ritual and quiet thought. The brothers walked in single file toward their small cells, the sound of their sandals brushing lightly across the smooth stone floor. No one spoke. Words were not needed. The silence held them like a soft cloak. Each cell was simple: a narrow bed, a small wooden cross, a folded robe, a candle stub left from the evening reading. The beds were made of straw, covered with plain woolen blankets, coarse to the touch, warm in the cold nights. A monk sat on the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed for a moment, as he allowed the quiet to settle deeper around him. The cool air of the night slipped through the small window, touching his face with the calm breath of the outside world. He whispered a short prayer, not for protection, but for rest of the mind and gentleness of spirit. Then he lay down, his movement slow and calm, his blanket drawn lightly over his shoulders. Yet even as they slept, the monastery remained awake in subtle ways. Stone halls carried sound like water carries ripples, farther than expected, yet softly, so softly that it never disturbed. A door creaked in the corridor, a robe brushed against stone, a faint cough echoed once and then faded. The fire in the kitchen settled deeper into ash, its last glowing tips casting a dim warmth beneath the iron pot. Outside, the courtyard fountain dripped slowly, a steady rhythm that monks had heard every night since they first arrived. The sky above the cloister held a scattering of stars. Their light fell gently into the open square and glimmered faintly on the stone tiles below. But there was something more, a moment that belonged only to monasteries. Between the first sleep and the second, when the night reached its deepest point, a bell rang. Once, twice. Slow, measured tones that rolled through the corridors like a soft echo of the heavens. It was the signal for the night prayers. Monks rose quietly. Some moved slowly, still wrapped in the calm heaviness of sleep. Others woke with practiced clarity, accustomed to the rhythm of these hours. They lifted their robes, pulled their hoods gently over their heads, and stepped out into the corridor. Sandals touched stone in a soft, patient rhythm. A candle was lit near the chapel door, its flame trembling, not from wind, but from the quiet footsteps approaching. The monks entered the chapel, one by one. Their shadows moved along the walls like soft brushstrokes in dim light. And in that moment, the monastery became a world of whispered breath, soft chanting, and the deep calm of souls drifting between rest and prayer. Their voices rose, not loudly, but gently, a slow tide of sound that filled the chapel with quiet harmony. The night itself seemed to still, as the ancient walls held the soft music with deep reverence. Yet the deepest hours held a gentleness found nowhere else. The monks' voices rose and fell in slow, even waves. Not songs, not chants of triumph, but soft threads of sound meant to calm the spirit and steady the breath. The chapel glowed with a handful of candles, their flames trembling in the cool drafts that slipped beneath the heavy wooden door. The scent of old wood, melted wax, and faint incense rested in the air like a memory that never fully faded. The brothers stood side by side, their hoods drawn, their eyes lowered, their hands folded gently against the long sleeves of their robes. Their breaths moved together, slow, calm, a shared rhythm shaped by years of practice. Yet even here, sleep was never far away. After the short night prayers ended, the monks left the chapel with the same quiet steps that had brought them in. Their silhouettes passed like soft shadows along the stone hallways. A single candle burned at the corner where the hallway turned. Its flame leaned slightly as each monk walked by, bowing to the gentle shift in the cold air. One by one, they returned to their cells. The straw beds waited. The blankets held the faint warmth left behind from earlier. The rooms were small, barely enough space for the bed, a stool, a wooden cross, and a small shelf with a worn book of psalms. But they were peaceful, deeply peaceful. A monk removed his sandals, set them neatly beside the bed, and lay down once more. The sound of his breath filled the tiny space with a calm that felt as steady as the stone walls. But the monastery around him remained quietly alive. In the main hall, the embers of the earlier fire glowed like hidden stars beneath a thin layer of ash. A mouse rustled near a basket of grain, its tiny movements barely noticeable against the soft hush of the night. The wind moved through the cloister garden outside, brushing against the herbs planted in simple rows: sage, mint, lavender, their scents rising in gentle threads whenever the air shifted. The fountain in the courtyard continued its slow drip, a rhythm that monks heard so often it became a part of their dreams. A distant owl called once from beyond the monastery wall, its voice low and hollow, drifting like a shadow across the sleeping grounds. Yet the coldest hour brought one more ritual. A young monk, one assigned to keep watch during the deepest part of the night, walked through the corridors with a small lantern in hand. Its light glowed like a warm drop of gold against the gray stone. He checked the doors. He checked the chapel. He paused at the entrance to the scriptorium, where ink and parchment rested in deep stillness until dawn. His footsteps were the only sound, and even they were quiet, barely a whisper on the stone floor. He placed another piece of wood on the fading kitchen fire, not enough to brighten the room, but enough to keep the embers alive until morning. Then he walked to the cloister and looked up at the sky. The stars glimmered above him, clear and cold. Their light fell into the courtyard like a gentle blessing cast over the quiet garden. He breathed slowly, deeply, calmly, and returned to his path. Yet even as the watchful monk moved, the rest of the brothers drifted into their second sleep. Their bodies relaxed, their minds settled. The weight of the day slipped away entirely. In each small cell, a quiet peace spread like warm light beneath the blankets. Second sleep was deep and dream-filled, a calm descent guided by the rhythm of prayer lingering softly in their hearts. The fire dimmed to a faint glow. The fountain dripped with patient stillness. The wind outside moved gently around the cloister walls. The monastery breathed in long, slow waves, a place of rest, discipline, and deep serenity. And so the night held them, brothers in silence, wrapped in wool, cradled in stone, until the first pale light began its slow path across the horizon. But sleep on the road was nothing like sleep at home. Night found travelers far from familiar walls and far from the steady comfort of rooms they knew well. Sometimes they found them on open roads, sometimes beneath a simple wooden roof, and sometimes in an inn so crowded that warmth and noise became part of the night's fabric. The sky above the countryside stretched wide and dark, holding countless stars that glimmered softly like distant embers. A traveler wrapped his cloak tighter as he walked along the quiet path. The ground beneath his boots held the chill of evening, and the wind brushed his face with the cold breath of distant hills. The scent of wet earth, damp leaves, and horse sweat mingled gently in the air. Far ahead, a small inn glowed like a warm spark in the darkness. Its windows flickered with firelight. Its signboard swayed with a slow creak whenever the breeze touched its edges. Yet travelers followed an unusual custom each night. They approached quietly, not from fear, but from respect, for the night, for the road, for the souls already resting inside. The innkeeper opened the door before the traveler could knock, as if sensing the presence of someone seeking warmth. Light spilled out, soft, golden, filled with the gentle scent of stew, clean straw, and fire smoke clinging to the air. Inside, the common room hummed with low voices, not loud, not rowdy, just the sound of tired people sharing the last hour before sleep. A woman wrapped in a wool shawl sat near the fire, her eyes half closed. A merchant quietly counted coins, the soft clink echoing like rain on stone. A stable hand dozed near the door, his head resting on crossed arms. The traveler stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The heaviness of the road fell from his shoulders as he lowered his pack to the floor. But the night held more than warmth inside these inns. Rooms were small and usually shared. The traveler climbed a narrow staircase that creaked gently beneath his boots and entered a chamber where strangers already slept. Several beds stood close together, each covered with simple wool blankets. A candle burned low near the window, casting quiet shadows across tired faces. The smell of straw, damp cloaks, old wood, and faint sweat mixed into a familiar scent known to all who journeyed. The traveler found an empty bed, placed his boots beside it, and lay down slowly, letting the blanket settle over his weary body. Outside, hooves clopped once as a late arrival led his horse toward the stable. Inside, someone shifted in their sleep, muttering a dream fragment that faded quickly into the quiet again. Yet there was something comforting about sleeping among strangers. The presence of other breathing bodies brought a sense of safety, a shared warmth, a shared night. The fire downstairs crackled faintly, its warmth rising through the wooden floor in soft waves. A dog padded across the hallway, its nails tapping lightly as it searched for a warm place to curl up. Rain began to fall outside. Slow at first, then steadier, each drop touching the roof with a soft patter that soothed the tired thoughts of everyone inside. The traveler pulled the blanket closer, feeling the weight of it pressed gently against him. He exhaled slowly, letting the softness of the moment settle into his bones. And as his eyes grew heavy, the inn became a quiet harbor, a place where the road paused and sleep drifted in like a warm tide, guiding tired souls into the first dream of the night. Yet the road always left its mark on the night. Even inside a warm inn, the echoes of travel lingered quietly around the room. A cloak still damp from rain gave off the earthy scent of wet wool and distant fields. A pair of boots by the doorway carried dust from faraway roads. A saddlebag rested near a bed, its leather creaking softly as it settled into place. The traveler shifted beneath the blanket, letting the warmth seep slowly into his tired muscles. For the first time all day, he felt still. Not walking, not watching the road, not listening for strangers, just still. Around him, the soft chorus of sleep filled the room. A man snored gently in the far corner. Someone whispered a few sleepy words before drifting deeper into dreams. A child, traveling with her mother, shifted closer to her warmth and let out a quiet sigh. But even in rest, the world of the end did not fully sleep. Below them, in the common room, the last embers in the hearth glowed like tiny stars, hidden in ash. The innkeeper sat in a chair, head nodding forward, drifting between wakefulness and sleep. Now and then, the wood of the building creaked softly as it settled for the night, a slow, familiar sound that echoed up through the floorboards into the sleeping chamber. Outside, rain tapped gently against the shutters, its rhythm slow and steady, as though the sky itself were breathing calmly. A horse in the stable shuffled its hooves and exhaled a warm breath that steamed faintly in the cool air. Yet travelers knew that night on the road could turn at any moment. A gust of wind pushed against the inn's walls. Branches brushed the roof. The signboard outside swayed with a long, slow creak. Not alarming, just a reminder of how thin the line was between comfort and the open darkness beyond. The traveler opened his eyes for a brief moment, not in fear, just to listen. He heard the soft breathing of strangers, the rain softening into mist, the quiet murmur of the inn's old timbers, and the far-off echo of someone arriving late to shelter. Hoofsteps, a lantern, a door opening, then closing with a gentle thud. He let his eyes drift closed again. But the inn held more stories than any traveler could see. In a small room downstairs, a merchant wrapped his cloak tighter as he lay on a narrow bed, thinking of the goods he carried and the long journey still ahead. Near the kitchen, a stable hand slept beside a basket of hay, his hands still smelling faintly of horse and leather. An old woman, who had traveled farther than most, kept a small charm in her palm, a smooth wooden cross she never slept without. and in the corner of the main room, a pilgrim rested with his back against a wooden pillar, his walking staff beside him, his hood drawn as he murmured a final prayer to steady his mind before drifting into sleep. Yet despite the many lives within its walls, the inn breathed as one. The rain eased, the wind softened, the last candle flickered near the staircase before settling into a calm, steady glow. The traveler's breath grew deeper. He folded one arm beneath his head and let the blanket's weight anchor him gently to the soft straw mattress. Sleep returned slowly, not forced, not rushed, but easing in like a familiar companion. Somewhere in the room, a log cracked softly in the small upstairs hearth, its glow spreading faint warmth into the darkened space. The traveler shifted once more, then settled fully. And so the inn, with its crowded beds, soft murmurs, distant rain, and the warmth of shared rest, became a safe harbor, a quiet pause in the long road carrying weary souls toward dawn. The night held them gently, the road waited patiently, and sleep, deep, warm, and untroubled, wrapped itself around the travelers until the very first hint of morning touched the horizon.
But fear always had a place in the night. In medieval homes, fear did not rush in loudly. It drifted in quietly, moving with the dimming fire and the long shadows resting along the walls. A small cottage lay still under the deep night sky. The fire had faded to a soft line of red, its glow breathing gently over the straw floor. The mother slept lightly, her children close beside her, their breaths rising in slow, warm waves beneath the wool blanket. But her eyes opened for a brief moment when a wooden beam released a soft, tired creak. There was no danger, no threat, only the old timbers settling deeper into the cool hours. Still, she listened, because night always carried a quiet sense of the unknown. Yet even fear had its rituals. Near the doorway hung a small charm braided from red wool and dried herbs, sage, rosemary, and a sprig of rowan. Its scent had faded over months, yet it still carried a gentle warmth, a reminder passed through generations that the home was protected. By the hearth, a wooden spoon crossed with a small knife rested on a flat stone. Her grandmother once said it kept wandering spirits from approaching the fire while the family slept. Not magic, not superstition, simply soft habits born from living close to darkness. But the night itself shaped fear in quiet ways. Outside, the wind brushed the cottage walls with a long, soft sigh. It moved the thatch above the ceiling in slow shivers that sounded like footsteps far away. A child stirred and drew the blanket closer. The mother placed her hand on the child's back, warm, steady, a signal that everything was safe. An owl glided above the cottage, its wings so silent that they left no trace except for a low call that drifted into the room like a distant memory. The father opened his eyes briefly, not startled, simply aware. He listened to the embers, to the soft breathing of his family, to the wind moving through the grass outside. Night carried mysteries, yet those mysteries were simply part of life. Yet people understood something deeper. Medieval nights felt older than the day. Shadows stretched wider. Objects took on shapes their daytime forms never held.
A chair in the corner could seem like a figure for just a moment before returning to its familiar outline. A cloak hanging on the wall could sway like a person breathing when the wind found a hidden gap in the door. The mother watched these gentle shifts with calm understanding. She had grown up with these shapes. They were not threats, only the quiet behavior of darkness. She whispered a soft phrase her own mother taught her. Night walks softly when hearts stay warm. The words lingered like a warm cloth laid across a cold stone. And fear, when held gently, brought families closer. The father shifted, pulling the blanket to cover everyone more fully. The children settled, letting out small breaths of comfort. The embers pulsed once, a warm orange heartbeat, then dimmed back into a steady glow. The mother's eyes closed slowly. Her breath matched the calm rhythm around her. Fear did not disappear, but it softened. It stayed close, quiet, held inside warmth and family closeness. The cottage breathed deeply, the children slept soundly, and the night moved gently onward, carrying every shadow with patient calm. Yet the deepest hour always carried one more layer. Across medieval Europe, every home felt a subtle shift when night reached its coldest, quietest point. In a townhouse, a merchant stirred on his straw mattress as a floorboard creaked above him. His mind, still drifting at the edge of dreams, turned the sound into something larger before softening again into calm. He touched the charm hanging near the window, a ring of iron wrapped with a strip of cloth. His mother had placed a similar charm over his childhood bed. He breathed slowly and closed his eyes. Outside, a lantern burned low at the corner of the street. Its flame swayed gently in the wind. But darkness played quiet tricks. A cloud drifted across the moon, stretching a shadow on the wall of a child's room. The child opened his eyes, watched the shape shift, and, for just a moment, the shadow seemed like a figure. But the cloud moved on, the light softened, and the shadow returned to being nothing more than a hanging cloak. The child exhaled and nestled deeper into the blanket. In another home, a woman rose to check the hearth. The embers glowed faintly under a thin veil of ash. She stirred them gently with an iron rod until soft warmth bloomed again beneath the coals. The ember crackle was soft and distant, like rain falling in another room. She touched a straw charm hanging above the hearth. The rosemary inside it released a faint scent as her fingers brushed past. It comforted her, not because she feared spirits, but because it reminded her of her mother's hands performing the same ritual decades before. But fear never settled where small habits lived. In a noble chamber, a servant slept lightly on a folded cloak near the door. A tapestry on the wall shifted in the night breeze. Its woven figures, hunters and deer, seemed to move for a brief moment. But the wind stilled, and the figures returned to stillness. The servant drew her cloak closer, her breath slow and calm. Even stone walls carried soft echoes at night. Footsteps from the guard below, a distant cough, the slow sway of a curtain. None of it troubled her rest. Even the monastery had gentle shadows. A monk awoke to the rhythm of the courtyard fountain, steady, patient, like a slow heartbeat folded into the night. In his half-dreaming state, the sound seemed to form faint words. He listened, smiled softly at his imagination, and lay down again. The candle in the hallway tilted slightly as a draft passed through. Its flame bent, then settled. The monk breathed slowly, folded his hands, and sank back into second sleep. But the singlest homes held the deepest warmth. Back in the village cottage, the mother awoke briefly, not from fear, but from the natural rhythm of night itself. She listened to the fire's quiet breath, to the father's steady exhale, to the children's soft murmurs as they shifted in sleep. She reached toward the small cross hung above the door, a simple carving, smooth from years of gentle touches. Her fingertips rested on it for a moment. Then she returned to the blanket. The family slept close, their warmth shared, their breaths woven into a single soft rhythm. And slowly, the fear dissolved into calm. The shadows moved softly along the walls. The wind whispered in careful breaths through the grass outside. Dreams drifted between memory and imagination. Night held its mysteries, its shapes, its old stories. But every family, every monk, every traveler had their own way of softening the darkness. A charm, a phrase, a warm hand, a quiet fire. Fear never left the night, but it walked gently when hearts rested close together. And so the deepest hours slid softly toward morning, their shadows thinning as the first pale hint of dawn touched the sky.
But dawn carried one final secret of the night. The darkest hours had finally softened, and the long quiet began to move gently toward morning. Dawn in medieval Europe did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a blanket being lifted from the world, one quiet breath at a time. Far to the east, a pale glow began to touch the sky. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft widening of light as night loosened its hold on the sleeping land. The small cottage where a family rested was the first to feel the shift. The mother's breathing changed slightly. She was not awake yet, but something within her, an old sense, a rhythm learned from years of living with the sun, recognized the change in light. The fire had nearly faded, its embers resting like quiet hearts beneath gray ash. Outside, a rooster's soft, broken call rose gently through the cool air, not fully formed, more like a sleepy attempt at greeting the day. Inside the cottage, the father shifted. The children curled deeper into the warm wool blanket as morning's first chill crept softly into the room. Yet dawn revealed something tender. Straw in the roof became faintly golden. The outlines of tools on the wall grew clearer. The wooden spoon by the hearth caught a small glimmer of light. The charm of red wool hanging near the door softened in color. Its herbs no longer shadows, but shapes again. The mother opened her eyes slowly, gently, as if the morning were a familiar friend. She listened to the quiet of her home, to the distant sound of a cow shifting in its stall, to the soft steps of a dog outside beginning its morning wander. Dawn did not rush. It settled. It spread. It took its time. But dawn touched more than the small cottage. In the town not far away,
The first light slipped between wooden shutters and narrow alleys. A baker, sleeping beside his cooling oven, exhaled deeply as warmth faded and morning cold reached his skin. He rose slowly, brushed flour from his sleeves, and opened the tiny window that faced the street. The air was cool, still, carrying the faint smell of smoke left from the night watch's torches. In a nearby room, a child stirred. She turned toward the window as the pale light rested gently on her face. For a moment, she did not wake. She simply felt it, like a soft hand touching her cheek. The town itself began to breathe differently. Wooden signs above closed shops swayed gently in the early breeze. Carts in the alley stood in quiet rows, waiting for the day's footsteps. The street cat that wandered each night paused near a doorway, its eyes narrowing at the first hint of the returning sun. Yet dawn's quiet beauty was clearest in the countryside. Mist stretched itself over the fields, thin, white, glowing faintly under the widening sky. It curled around fences, rose above sleeping cattle, and drifted across the small dirt path that led toward the inn standing farther down the road. The travelers who had fallen asleep to the sound of rain, now resting in a room filled with gentle, pale light. One man shifted, pulled the blanket from his shoulder, and sighed as he felt the cool air of morning. Another traveler, a woman with a heavy cloak, opened her eyes briefly at the soft rhythm of a rooster's call from somewhere outside. She did not rise yet. Morning had come, but it was still soft enough to linger within. And the inn itself met dawn with quiet acceptance. The common room below still smelled faintly of last night's fire. The cups left on tables rested in silence. And the windows, small and uneven, glowed with the faintest shade of gold. Dawn had arrived. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, like a warm cloth laid slowly over a sleeping world.
Yet the first light always revealed something deeper. As dawn widened across the land, each place greeted it in its own quiet way. In the monastery, where stone walls held night's cold breath, the faint sound of the bell rose through the corridors. Not loud, not urgent, just a gentle call for the brothers to welcome the morning. A monk, still wrapped in his woolen blanket, opened his eyes at the familiar tone. He breathed slowly, feeling the cool air against his face. The candle near his bed had burned low, leaving only a soft line of unmelted wax along the edge of the holder. He stood, pulled his robe around his shoulders, and walked quietly across the stone floor. His footsteps echoed just once, before the silence absorbed them again. Outside, the courtyard fountain reflected the first light, a shimmer of pale gold dancing on the surface of the water. The monk paused, watched it, and let the calm of morning settle into his breath. But dawn moved differently in the fields. Farmers, though still asleep, shifted beneath blankets as the cold faded and the air grew clearer. Their animals felt it too. Cows stretched their heavy necks. A horse stamped lightly in the stable, shaking off the last hint of night chill. Chickens rustled behind their wooden gate,
waiting for the moment the door would open. Mist rose from the earth like a quiet offering, carrying the smell of wet soil, early grass, and the faint sweetness of nearby orchards. A shepherd, sleeping beside his dogs, opened one eye as the first warmth touched the hillside. He whispered softly, reassuring the animals still nestled around him. His dogs lifted their heads, ears twitching toward the light, before resting again. But dawn held a special stillness in the town. Shutters opened slowly, doors creaked gently, smoke curled upward from the first rekindled fires. A baker pushed open his shop window, letting the cool morning air fill the room before he began kneading dough. His hands moved rhythmically, each motion soft and steady. He had done this every morning for years, yet dawn always felt a little different, a little new. Farther down the street, a woman collecting water from a wooden barrel paused for a moment to breathe in the cold air. She watched the sunlight touch the rooftops one by one, as if it were brushing the town awake with gentle hands. Even the cats, usually wandering late into night, paused near the doorways, their fur glowing faintly in the early warmth. But the inn met dawn with the deepest calm. Travelers lay still beneath blankets, the golden light moving across their faces like a soft invitation to wake slowly. The woman in the heavy cloak opened her eyes and listened